Hey, welcome everyone to another episode of Dominate the Nation. I'm Maxine Dugan, your host with my special guest.
Hi, I'm Bella Robinson from Coyote RI. Thanks, Maxine, for informing me about this so interesting case. I'm looking forward to digging in deep about it.
Yeah. So this case that we're going to talk about today is featured in an LA Times article. It's titled, How a Madam at a Chinese Massage Parlor Outside LA Took on Federal Law Enforcement. It's dated August 2nd. I'll put the link, of course, in the show notes. It was behind a paywall, so I had to, get it. But I'm so excited to be able to talk to you about this case today. This woman, her name was Maxine. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Hopefully somebody maybe in the comments section could, comment and tell me the proper pronunciation. I kind of searched around on the internet a little bit to try to figure out the proper pronunciation of her name, but she did 3 years in jail on 5 accounts of federal sex trafficking charges. And her story and the story of her trial is depicted in this LA Times article, and everybody should have their eyes on it. And so she testifies. What's interesting about her case, Bella, is that she testifies on the stand through a Chinese interpreter. She's a Chinese immigrant. And she says, I've never forced anybody to engage in prostitution. Remember that the federal, sex trafficking definition says that you have to have force, fraud, or coercion. And the prosecutors had to prove that Zing used threats of force, fraud, or coercion to cause victims to engage in prostitution.
I totally get why she took the risk in testifying. She's 62 years old. The minimum sentence would be 15 years. And this goes to show if the federal government gets a hard on for any of us and puts us under a microscope, they can just lie and lie. But I think she did a great job defending herself. Madam, I'm going to call her Madam Zing because I can't pronounce her name either. There's no disputing that she was not a trafficker. She is from China. I can't pronounce the town, about 80 miles from Beijing. Her mother was a doctor. Her father was a land administrator. And she earned an associate degree and worked as a midwife in the hospital. So she migrates to the United States and starts working in other people's spas. And she wanted to, she placed a help wanted ad to find workers to work in this spa that she ran at strip clubs that were largely Asian and Latino. The article says she kept handwritten ledgers day by day to show which woman worked, what time, how much money each client brought in, how much money the house got, how much money the workers got, and that they were free to quit at any time.
Yeah. And so for the federal government to prove their case against her, they had to produce independent evidence to corroborate her accuser's allegations, but they didn't do that. So it turned out to be like her word against theirs, and the trial just took place 3 weeks in the month of June. So Zing testified that she had placed these help wanted ads, for massage parlor workers that she ran in these strip malls in largely Asian and Latino, suburbs of Los Angeles called the San Gabriel Valley. The article says that she kept all these ledgers and, any employee was, free to quit at any time.
One part I really love is when she started her own business, she tried to do legit. She told the front desk, listen to the hallway. If you hear any signs, we're going to fire these people. She told all of them, you can't have sex. But all the customers seemed to they would leave if they couldn't get a happy ending. So she finally told the jurors that she told the masseuse, well, we're going to allow it anyway. she tried to do the right thing. And one thing I've always loved, I've never worked at an a massage parlor, but I did massage work 30 years ago before anyone heard about an Asian massage parlor. And you could choose just to do massage, to do hands-on, to do blowjobs, to do full service. And they took their money by setting the appointment, and you were on tips. And that's how they did it in Rhode Island. And in Rhode Island in 2009, we had 100 Asian spas. So you could, if one of them didn't treat you right, you could walk 2 blocks away, and nobody was ever charged with massage without a license until they criminalized us. So, yeah.
Right. And that, my experience when I started out, I started in a massage parlor, a 24-hour massage parlor. And there were no Asians running massage parlors in my town. It seemed to me that the South Koreans started to come in the mid to late 80s, and started to take over those massage businesses because they were all legitimate businesses. We all had licenses, we all had permits to work. We had, the public health department in there once a year doing inspections, because we had, jacuzzis and saunas. We had the fire department in there doing inspections, and those houses that existed, back then, I mean, they had been there for decades. And so they were very much a part of the larger community. You could still go work the streets if you wanted to. Alcohol was not that popular back then, because you had all these parlors that you could just go to and hang out in, and have a lot of safety amongst the workers. If there was somebody who was a certain particular customer was a certain way, the ladies would just share that information amongst themselves. Oh, this person likes this or like that, or, you're not going to like this person, you should let so-and-so go see them. We would say those kinds of things because, it kept the harmony going, it kept everybody happy.
And massage was advertised in newspapers across the country. I remember in Florida, you had to put your license number for them to run it. So my friend owned a massage parlor and would let me do out calls for her, even though I wasn't licensed. But I remember one time where she worked, they came in and she hadn't done her her CME credits, and her license expired, and she was fined $100. And her boss told her to go home until she, got it. But there was no civil arrest that her license has expired, like massage without a license is being done now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We're all in the underground now. Yeah. Thanks to, FOSTA SESTA, thanks to all the Trafficking Victim Protection Acts that have wiped out all those licensed facilities. Great job, you guys.
This part really rings that her accusers alleged that several customers raped them. Sexual assault in the context of commercial sex is a crime, but nobody was charged with these cases. Well, one, if it was true, the reasons they weren't reported and charged with the crime is because you've criminalized us and we don't have immunity, and we are arrested even if we are rape victims, if we've been exploited, if we're a trafficking victim. They arrest you and put you on the news, and then they don't prosecute you, but they've already ruined your life by the media coverage, right? A big concern of the parlor was the danger of police raids. And I think even with clients, do you want to be at the parlor? We know it's only $60, but is that where you want to be if they're raided? Might not be, but we found at most of these raids, even in the Georgia spa massacres, there were few clients in the establishments. I think they check it, as long as you don't have a warrant, they just let the clients leave. And then the women are the ones that are arrested. And in Rhode Island, we proved that 98% of the arrests are the women. So, but yeah, they go on about the police, raids and condoms being hidden with false bottoms. And we found in charging documents when Homeland came to Rhode Island that they were in the ceiling looking for condoms. And quite frankly, maybe we should arrest people who don't have condoms. Like, anyone in the right mind knows this undermines public health and safety.
Yeah, and, California passed a law, and it came into effect, I think, in 2020, and it said that condoms could no longer be used as probable cause in prostitution cases in California. But on our public records request too, that's depicted in our recent report on, how the war on sex work is stripping your privacy rights, we found clearly that the cops are continuing to search for condoms. They're continuing to use those condoms and list them in the police reports as probable cause for arrest for prostitution. So, yeah, the police
And
just
they
kind
can
of
also
do
be
whatever they want.
They can also use it as instruments of a crime, like they'll use a cell phone or a laptop and claim they were instruments of a crime. And it almost sounds like you have burglary tools, or instruments, because God forbid if we ever had free sex or sex outside of our job, because we're not allowed to do that because we're whores. And
Right. Everything's on the clock, apparently, according
yes.
to these
Oh, we're
people. They're
time
crazy.
watching, and we never can make enough money. We never shut down. I mean, you ever get clients like they act like you never stop, like you have to take everyone that calls you, like they don't get that we pick who we want to see. And maybe not all of us are that desperate, but yeah, this idea. And one thing I wanted to point out is one of them testified, Luno testified that she typically earns $6,000 or $7,000 a month in tips. So one of the Rhode Island charging documents, they claim one of the workers said she'd only made $5 all day in tips. Now, maybe it was a day where she didn't see any customers, okay? Because the women would come down from Flushing, they would stay with the manager in her home, so they didn't have to pay for hotels. She had a little van that would drive them back and forth to work, and you didn't have to stay there 12 hours, but that's when the van comes and goes if you want a free ride. I don't believe anyone hung out in the massage parlors, even washing towels for $5 for the day. So I think that's important. If it was a bad gig and you were being so exploited, how are you making $6-7 grand a month? Heck, I don't make that much money a month.
Well, maybe back in the day, but what's interesting is that the accusers in this case, as their, testimony is being reflected by this LA Times article, that one of the masseuses, said that she was terrified of, a big spender that would come, to the parlor and, that would pressure her into having unprotected sex. And certainly, having unprotected sex is, everybody should have the right to say yes and the right to say no. And, it just looks to me like part of what the accusers in this particular case are talking about is they're talking about some on-the-job disputes. That's what they're talking about.
And
they're
way she
talking
worded it was he pressured her and forced her. Well, if I pressure you to violate your boundaries and you allow me to, she used the word he talked her into it. Well, that's not force. If you're able to talk
and
out of
it's
a
force
condom,
on it's force on his part. It's not force on the woman who was charged with sex trafficking's part. So that's part of the disconnect that happened in this particular case. And what's interesting to me in this particular case too, is that this case was triggered by the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Human Trafficking. It's a Los Angeles nonprofit that operates a hotline for sex workers to call and report trafficking. But this group's leadership declined to comment for this article because, CAST took two of the women to see this particular LA County sheriff. His name was Nicholas Stewart, and he was the lead investigator on 50 other human trafficking cases. So he's supposed to be this big, huge, experienced person, and he testifies in this case against Zing that he was on the Los Angeles County Task Force, which included, of course, the sheriff's department, the one that didn't respond to our public records request, the FBI, and so he starts this case against her. And so he starts the case because of the first witness, who's talking about she was sexually assaulted on her job but she ends up in a dispute or some sort of fight with the woman who's charged. And so it ends up looking like retaliation,
And actually, I got that quote. Witness one said the madam had threatened to tell the police she was a prostitute if she refused to serve its clients. Now, according to the search warrant filed by Stewart, she was scared. Witness one reported because Zing had photos of her changing clothes in the presence of condoms or massage records. But evidence would plead that a prosecution soon emerged. It turned out that witness one had invested $10,000 in the brothel, and they were 50-50 partners with the madam. So it would be unusual for a trafficking victim to share in profits for a brothel. And I think about it, if someone threatened to tell, hey, Bella, I'm going to tell the world you're a prostitute if you don't do this, I'd be like, bitch, I'm going to tell him you're a trafficker. I mean, come on. I would be able to threaten this madam. I could have exploited her. I'm not giving you any of my patent. If you lock the door and not let me work, I'm calling it. I mean, we had a lot more on her than she had. So yes, but I'm glad that they found that because, and I'm also glad that they found that these women had all done sex work before they worked for this madam and afterwards.
Yeah. And so Zing, the owner who's charged with sex trafficking, she finds out that this first witness is not dropping the money as the agreement was. And so that's how she ends up firing her. So, so the woman retaliates against her and goes and reports her to this coalition, this nonprofit, this group to, they help go report her to the police. And so the first charges against this woman were actually state charges. They were state pimping and pandering charges, right?
And they upgraded them, right?
Yeah, they upgraded them. And then so the Los Angeles Times does a article about this arrest, and they put in this nonprofit's phone number at the bottom of the article, as well as this detective, Nicholas, Stewart, whatever his name is. And they tell the public, if there's any other, cases or other witnesses out there or victims, if there's any other victims, contact us. So of course, 4 other accusers come forward through this nonprofit to make similar accusations.
One who had been fired for bringing drugs to work, another one who had been ripping the madam off. Right. And you know what? This is the part I love the most, because I can understand why someone that has never been arrested for prostitution might lie and say, I was scared of the driver, or because they know what's going to happen when they put them in the media. They know their life is over. But I also love the fact that they talked about the T visas, because while the U.S. is allowed to issue 5,000 T visas a year, per Elena, who worked on that when she was in college, 2/3 of the ones claiming trafficking status are denied.
Right. Yeah,
and
because
most trafficking happens outside the sex industry. Think about the recent article where 13-year-olds were working at a slaughterhouse, and they found out because they went to school with acid burns. Nothing happened to the slaughterhouse, but 2 of their families were deported.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And that's part of what's crazy about this case here, Zing's case, is that after these other 4 witnesses come forward, it turns into a federal case. So that's how the federal government, the FBI, the U.S. attorney that's involved, the sheriff's department, help these 4 witnesses fill out these special T visas in exchange. But those T visas are only given out now, Bella, in exchange for your testimony against a trafficker. So you can't get that special T visa unless you cooperate and provide testimony against the trafficker. So, with nothing else to buttress, the allegations against this woman, the defense attorneys brought up the immigration deals that all of these masseuses got, because all these women had worked as masseuses prior to working with this woman, and they worked after.
And
And
another thing, there was an article.
Zing herself had had prostitution arrests. She had suffered 2 prostitution arrests. So she was a worker herself too.
And there was an article, I believe it might have been something Alina wrote, that once you say you're a victim and you're undocumented, they put you in these lockdown shelters with the NGO. They take away your cell phones. They do give you a little spending money, but they say if they don't get a conviction or you don't testify, you're going to owe them the money and then you won't get your T visa. So basically, could you imagine going to work at a spa and the spa's raided, you become a victim and you're whisked off to this shelter and your family just wonders why you didn't come home. It seems kind of like the blacklist sites where they kidnap people and illegally interrogate them. And, what happened to these people? And when you think about, if you spend a lot of time and money getting here, if they're saying if you lie and say you're forcing you to TVs and you can stay, why wouldn't you? And I'm not saying that every undocumented person has never been victimized, but certainly they weren't in this case. Yeah.
Well, I mean, so what's also interesting is that they got a hold of the electronics, right? They got a hold of like a bunch of videos, audio recordings, texts that showed that the accusers were actually, having a good time with the women that they're accusing, that they socialized together. They had social gatherings. They told the jury, they all got up on the stand and testified against her. And one of them said, that she was paid money to have sex with guys. She didn't want to have sex with him. She didn't want to give the money back because she really couldn't afford to, because she needed the money. So she had sex with the guy. So it's just like, well, Zing didn't really force you. You made that decision. So, they just thought that, when they complained, to her about certain things that were going on, she just treated them in a really mean way. And and so that's kind of, oh, she was mean. She was a mean trafficker. And so that's like the US government's evidence here. She was a mean girl.
And I can imagine being grumpy when everyone's trying to rip you off and you're paying the rent, you're taking the risk. They're only going to get a misdemeanor. You go into prison. Like you said, she's held for 3 years with no bond. And they know in most cases, especially for a misdemeanor, no one's going to spend 10 grand on a lawyer and fight it. And that's why I love that when they raided Foxy Ladies and we supported Lindsay Hoffman, who had a trial by judge, and he found her not guilty. He said, when she said, come in the VIP room and you can have anything you want, that can mean a million different things. And it was sad because they did the investigation based off a rape claim. So you pay the cashier $100 and give $300. The girl gets $200, the cashier keeps $100. And it was a regular from New Hampshire. He paid the cashier and said, honey, I'll hit the ATM and pay you on the way out. Then he refused to pay her. So the bouncer called the cops and reported him for assault. The cops arrived, he went to the ATM, paid, everyone went home. And their response to either theft or rape would be to do a sting 2 weeks later. And the Patriots party there. They've been partying there for 30 years, which is kind of funny because we could talk about Robert Kraft later. But yes, they obviously do not want these women to be safe.
No, because I don't see there's nothing in these sex trafficking charges that investigates the sexual assaults that happen on these women's job that these women are talking about. And in fact, the prosecutor incredibly elicits testimony from the accusers that one of the customers they identified as the cop would force them to have sex against their will. The women said that they were instructed by the owner, Zing, to do whatever the cop wanted and were led to believe that he got sex for free because Zing was paying him for protection. And so the testimony was supposed to provide direct evidence that Zing was guilty. And one of the many ways that she trafficked women is by, force, fraud, or coercion. But one of the accusers under, testimony was asked, by the prosecutor, how she felt to serve, how she felt when she had to serve, the cop who didn't pay. And she responds, I felt that it was somewhat safer for me. So in her mind, it was safer to have sex with a cop for free than to be arrested for prostitution. And what does that say about your sex trafficking, your crazy sex trafficking laws that allow cops to, do all this stuff and get away with it? It's unbelievable. Oh, did I lose you, Bella? Well, I'll keep going here.
Hey,
Well, the government, are you there?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had to answer the door, honey, so I put you on mute.
Okay.
Absolutely, when you think the cop can exploit you, but we're not going to talk about that or charge them with trafficking. And I've always thought it funny that law enforcement uses force, coercion, or fraud to arrest us. And that is exactly the definition of trafficking. So they're allowed to be our traffickers,
It's unbelievable. It's just crazy to me. The government's case also suffered another major setback when a witness testified after being sexually assaulted several times, and then she was fired in front of the whole crew in the parlor, and then she felt like she was being, shamed, and and so it's just like, okay, so now you're going to say you're sexually assaulted after you're fired because you don't like the way you were fired. And so, we can certainly talk about how we treat each other, when we're coworkers and when we work together and work for each other. I mean, that's why we got to have some grievance processes here, right? To address
the anti-trafficking people that consider all sex work paid rape, and they kind of groom and brainwash women, sex workers, into saying they were, oh, honey, you don't understand. It wasn't your boyfriend. He was really your pimp. And when you won't play the victim, they become aggressive and abusive. And they're asking you questions in earshot of the police, which is kind of violating your Fourth Amendment. Like, these women, I don't know why they're saying, I'm not talking to you. Take me to jail. I got nothing to say. Take me to jail. But imagine when you're undocumented, you're going to go, it's a big risk. It's a big risk.
Well,
but
the problem here for me is that, a lot of workers in the sex industry don't have access to a grievance process, to report, because of the criminalization of our labor. If you're working with other people and somebody gets sexually assaulted or somebody gets ripped off, like here in the Bay Area, we have that guy running around paying workers with fake $100 bills. And so, it's been reported to the police because we have immunity at the state level here in California that you can report serious crime without the threat of being arrested for prostitution. Well, it's been reported. And, the cops are not doing anything about it. They're just kind of like, well, until somebody gets, hurt, what does that mean? Beat up? I mean, so if the only way right now, well, my point is that if the only way to redress the grievances and, the situations that are going on our jobs is to call the police, we need to find another way to deal with those grievances, just like other workers, right? Other workers, have a grievance process, within their union, or they have a shop steward, or, sort of a regional shop steward to deal with issues. Companies, bigger companies,
bars,
bigger companies.
You can be banned for shoplifting. Blacklist sites to warn people about bad clients.
Yeah, but I'm talking about grievances on your job. I'm talking about, if you've got a bad client on your job, you have to, you have to have the right to say yes, and you have to have the right to say no, and your other coworkers have to be in agreement about that. You have to have a safety protocol. If something happens, what are you going to do?
And a great
In our
example is in New Zealand, where they decriminalized prostitution, and a brothel worker was able to sue the manager for sexual harassment and was awarded $25,000 because she had labor rights.
Right, but they have it, but that social structure in New Zealand is set up way differently from ours.
Oh, of
We have
course.
a wage and hour commission here in our state, on a state by state basis as per the federal labor laws. So you can go and dispute, yeah, I worked for 12 hours and all I got was, $80, off of the one customer I saw today. And, so you could talk about, if you always are going to have to go to these government agencies and not really have some way to settle a bunch of disputes, within your job or even within our industry. Bella, you and I have had fights. We have activists in the the sex worker rights movement that fight, and so unfortunately, we don't have an agreed upon way to deal with these disputes, deal with these things that are going on our jobs or in our activism spaces. And so it just falls apart and it makes us weak, I guess, is what my point is that if this particular outfit had some access to a grievance process, then it probably wouldn't have escalated to the point of people being sexually assaulted or people wanting to engage in all this retaliatory behavior against this woman. Because in the end, ultimately, the prosecutors tried to accuse her of being a part of a gang, that she can physically threaten these women. And they even call her brother from China to come over and testify that, neither she or him have any affiliation with any gang members in any way, shape, or form. And so it's just like, well, after the jury hears all this stuff,
That's the part I love.
They acquit her. She's
Deliberation
acquitted.
lasted 5 hours. The jurors, who were not publicly identified, agreed there was reasonable doubt about whether this madam had forced any women into sex against their will. The trafficking part of it just wasn't there, said one juror. Another said that the prosecutor's case just didn't make sense. And it's always a different view when you hear the whole story instead of just the cops and the government's narrative. When I talk to students, even though I have to deprogram them from trafficking. And once I talk about 10 minutes, they're like, you're right, Bella, none of this shit makes sense. And we're not saying that people aren't trafficked or exploited, because of course, when you can't tell, it's easy to abuse people. So,
right. But
yeah.
My point is that, we as an industry are going to have to engage in some other, inter-industry processes to start to sort out our own issues. Because, what I see is that they start on your job, on your work site, and then they escalate. And then they turn into problems for everybody.
I remember when I was 18 or 19 working for my first agency called Something Special in Tampa, Florida. When she hired me, because I called from the yellow pages, I sent an independent contractor agreement that said if I did anything illegal, I would be terminated my contract, and then I would get 40% and they would get 60%, and it spelled everything out. And this woman never spoke of anything for me for months. And they send you to a regular first to see how you do, right? And finally, after a couple months, we took a walk. It was like warehouses outside. So, I guess she patted me down. We're not in the office in case it's bugged. And then, she admits stuff and tells me the receptionist got busted. And that's why she's only answering the phones now. But there was no one to teach you about condoms or what to do with. And I was young and I had horrible boundaries. You know, you learn about getting boundaries and being a bitch. That means you know how to say no with life experience. But, you know, this really all comes down to why these trafficking orgs do not want workers to work together, knowing they're safer. And I choose to work alone because I ain't going to be accused of a felony. And it is more dangerous. But yeah. And as we wrap up this, I want to talk about a couple similar cases. And there's one, if you Google, and you can put these links in your thing at the end, but there were 7 officers charged with running 8 New York brothels in September 2018. And in it, they used women from Central America. They charged $60 and the girl got 30, but when they serviced a cop, they didn't have to pay and they didn't get paid. So then I guess the trafficking people come in and interview the women and claim they're victims. And then it was either the AD or the district attorney said they were outraged at the trafficking orgs. What they did by turning these prostitutes into victims was worse than what the police did. And I don't believe it. After Google, I don't believe anyone was charged with trafficking. But my favorite was Reason a magazine did it. The biggest sex trafficking bust in FBI history was totally bogus. And the story starts that a 14-year-old in Tennessee runs away with her boyfriend to the next town and he's ignoring her. So she starts having sex with his friends. And she eventually shows up at this woman's house that knew her family. And the lady says, honey, you can stay the night, but I got to call your mom. So they arrest all these Samoan brown
I
skin.
remember that case. I remember that.
And they say this is a Somali sex trafficking ring. And these are all international students, but they're brown. Hey, that goes with the government's narrative, you know. And the woman that let her stay the night was held in jail for 4 years. Okay. Meanwhile, they went to the school, the FBI lady, and they interviewed this girl 30 times without her mother's consent. And on the stand, she breaks down and says, the FBI lady told me to talk about money and prostitution, but none of that was going on. And then last year, one of the cases the Supreme Court refused to hear was the woman that was locked up for 4 years. And then they dismissed the charges and just let her go. And you know, it was about qualified immunity, but the Supreme Court didn't think that was an important thing to take on because they rather take on the case about whether the coach can pray and websites have to make websites for gay people and these important things about religion.
I saw something recently that said a Supreme Court ruling said that federal officers can no longer be personally sued.
Nobody can. You can't sue any of these people. And that's why with our immunity bill, we're going to put at the end that it removes qualified immunity. You don't get to say, sorry, I didn't know you were a victim and arrested you for being a whore. It doesn't matter if I'm a whore. If I'm reporting one of these violent crimes, you can't arrest me or use any knowledge I give you to try to arrest me in the future. And as you know, we have 2 versions of the bill, and the one bill just said crimes, which is bad because someone could say, Maxine, if you won't have unprotected sex with me, I'm going to call the police and tell them you're a prostitute and I'll get immunity. And this would allow sex workers to snitch on each other. And I remember a lot of the spas that were paying the police. If you remember, a bunch of spas in that town would get raided, but the one the cops were protect. We'll just take out your competition and you'll get more clients and we'll all have more money. And yeah, it goes on and on. But the last thing I want to talk about, if you Google Florida judge throws out prostitution conviction, was from 2011. The jury says this woman is guilty of prostitution. The judge goes, wait a minute, you didn't even prove prostitution occurred. So he throws out the conviction. And it's kind of proof that any woman accused of being a prostitute can not get a fair, non-biased jury of her peers because society is taught to hate you. And I started asking college students, how old were you when you knew what a prostitute was and where did you learn this? Because most of us know by the time we're 5. We learn from, you know,
well, it's like little kids calling each other, you know, telling each other they're gay and using the F word.
Right.
And, yeah.
Right. And TV is modeled that even the birth of the nation goes all the way back to how Hollywood is portrayed
Yeah, it's
as.
ingrained in society. Yeah, we know
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
By the time you're 5, you know what a hoe is, and and that the black kid told me the most interesting story. He's driving down the road with mom late at night, and there's a black woman on the corner. He goes, "Mama, how come you're not going to offer her a ride?" And she says, "Because she's a bad woman." So he doesn't even understand what sex is, but he already understands they're bad women. And that's like you say, there are no bad women, there are bad laws. So, but I'm so grateful that you alerted me to this, because I missed it because it was behind the paywall.
Yeah.
And I would love to invite Madam Link to any event or have dinner with her and pick her brain. I think she could.
Yeah.
Fabulous story. And I also don't believe for a minute that if someone, like, I get her being mean about trivial complaints. But I believe if one of her spa workers said, "That guy was rough, he raped me, I told him no, he took up the gun," it doesn't, she's going to ban him, because if he does it to all of them, they're going to get diseases. All the women are going to.
Well, they're all going to quit eventually. I
Of course
mean,
he's not going to
come
call
on,
the
it's just
cops.
that's what I mean. There has to be some other type of way to, address, a bunch of these problems without, blowing up the situation. But I guess the thing I want to end with here is that I just have a lot of concerns about how much federal money is going into these types of prosecutions, how much federal money is being wasted on these human trafficking task forces, how much money is being wasted on these nonprofits that, like the coalition against whatever they're against, prop up the prison industrial complex. That's all federal money. It's all coming through the Trafficking Victim Protection Act. And, we need to put a stop to that, because
Meanwhile, LA can't house their homeless.
Well, it's solely responsible for, all of these injustices that are complicating things, and they're not bringing any justice to people that work in our industry.
In Rhode Island, it cost $187,000 to incarcerate someone for a year. So when you're sentenced to 90 days for prostitution, that's $46,500. And think about if someone really did want to exit, because I think services should be for everyone, not just us, right? But if there was housing and there was a social service, people would be lined up for miles. You wouldn't have to go catch victims with a net. And I hate,
yeah, you wouldn't have to run a prostitution sting on them and have sex with them and then arrest them for prostitution in order to save them. Right. So what? So you can give them no services. The only services you're offering people is, some sort of shelter situation where people are, basically incarcerated anyway, and they're beholden to you.
And dump their
God, Bella.
Yes. So we kind of have a saying, if you're going to rescue me, can we at least get a rescue sandwich with that?
Rescue sandwich with that. Yeah.
You can call. I just had someone reach out to me the other day and say they were a sex worker and they're mad at the trafficking works because they feel they're being forced back into sex work because of poverty, not because from a person. And I said, well, we know they have no services. Sorry, they're a scam. I said, tons of people are homeless that can't get into a shelter. I don't know why. People that work at Walmart, are they forced to work at Walmart to pay their rent? I mean, you're obviously going to make a choice about going back, but that doesn't make you a victim. And when you call Swap Behind's hotline, you're mad because they can't solve your poverty problem. Well, I can't solve your poverty or the housing crisis either, but please stop saying you're a victim, because that's just not cutting it. Of course,
it's not going to get you.
I was crazy.
It's not going to get you a bigger, better rescue sandwich. I mean, the big problem for the public safety dollars are being allocated towards, these things that we've outlined today. And the research clearly shows if you want to stop forced labor in the sex industry, you need to provide permanent and stable housing. Exactly. And that's not a shelter.
And we need to fix our youth services, because what we found in Rhode Island for 20 years, there was only 2 adults that were trafficking victims. They were a homeless woman that was alerted her. And think about how easy it is to exploit it, a homeless person in any labor sector, right? And
Right.
then all the rest were minors, mostly in state care. And they charged 3 18-year-old girls with sex trafficking of a minor who will be registered sex offenders. And then the group home supervisor had the kid pimp them out using the state van, and they were only charged with 1 count of trafficking, and that was downplayed. But what we found is most of the people being arrested for trafficking is the 17-year-old has an 18-year-old driver to an appointment or be a security
Yeah.
guard. So we didn't find
wait,
any forced coercion or fraud, even with
let,
minors, except for 1 case.
okay, let's save that for another topic for another day, because we can talk a lot about who's being charged with
Yes.
sex trafficking, who's getting convicted of sex trafficking. Yeah.
Or even,
Okay.
or how fun your life turns out once you get a prostitution conviction on your record. Right. But thank you,
Okay.
Maxine.
Okay.
And
Have a good day.
you
We'll
too.
talk to you
Thank
later.
Bye.
Bye.